shown in the previous videos allow you to create HTML, CSS, and JavaScript code. Sometimes it makes more sense to use integrated development environments. These tools provide a lot of integrated functionality that extends beyond simply entering and editing the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript code. One prime example is Visual Studio Code, which is available as a free download from Microsoft. Visual Studio Code runs on the Windows platform, on Linux platforms, and on the Macintosh platform. As an example, I have Visual Studio Code open here. You can see that we have an Explorer available here in this pane, and you can see that we have an editor available here in this pane. With the Explorer, we have the ability to open files and folders in the left-hand pane and navigate through that structure to find the files that we need to work with. The editor allows us to enter and edit the content of the files that we're concerned with. The editor supports a bunch of different file formats. In this case, I'm actually using a file format known as Markdown Pad. Once we have started working within the Visual Studio environment and editing our text files, we have a bunch of different options available with this tool as well. One of which is a search option. We can search within our text files for specific pieces of text, and we can replace text that we decide we need to replace within the file itself. Also, we have integration with Git, the Git source control functionality. So if we have a Git repository locally on our machine, we can connect Visual Studio Code to that Git repository. So as an example, if I make changes to this file, you'll notice that Visual Studio Code gives me a visual indicator that there is a file change required. If I come back and look at the file structure, it doesn't really change in here, but I know that I've made changes to a file. This little green indicator tells me that there were changes made to this file. So I can simply go File, Save, or use the Control-S shortcut, and this will save my file. Now again, because I'm using Git integration and I have a Git repository for these files locally on my computer, the Git functionality knows that I've made changes to the file, and it shows me the file that I've made changes to, and that it needs to be committed for me to put that into my source control mechanisms. In this case, I'll just simply put a little bit of text that says updated text content, and then I can press the Control-Enter key, and then the Visual Studio integration with Git will commit those changes to my local copy. Then when I'm ready, I can go to the command line for Git, and I can actually push these changes up to my repository if necessary. Visual Studio Code also includes some debugging functionality. So if we are using JavaScript or even C# or other programming languages that are supported by Visual Studio Code, we can actually monitor our variables, we can set watch conditions, we can look at the call stack, and we can look at the breakpoints that may be present in our code as we step through them. And finally, before we stop our presentation of Visual Studio Code, it's also important to note that there are a lot of extensions available for Visual Studio Code. The community is adding more and more extensions for Visual Studio Code all the time. The three that I currently have enabled in this instance of Visual Studio Code are Instant Markdown, and this is a way of having the ability to preview what I'm writing for my Markdown Pad code here into a browser window on my computer. As I make changes, it will render the HTML that would be output from my Markdown Pad document. I also have a PowerShell extension added so that I can use PowerShell or write PowerShell scripts very easily within Visual Studio Code. And if you're a Python programmer, we also have a Python language extension for Visual Studio Code as well. This is a very quick rundown of Visual Studio Code. It's a very powerful, free code editor available from Microsoft, and a lot of people are now using this in the industry as they work on their front-end web application development.